The pandemic has been a billionaire bonanza because the 10 richest men have doubled their income in the last 2 years, and that is on top of unprecedented growth over the last 14 years. So that accumulation at the top is in contrast with the majority, the 99% of humanity, being worse off as a result of the pandemic. And clearly, this is a state of affairs that can't continue. And we see during this year, billionaires going up in space, burning into space, while the majority of people are suffering with the pandemic. So how to address that? Taxing the wealth of the richest men would give resources to address some of the reasons why people are not able to cope with the pandemic. The access to health and access to basic services. The Industrial Revolution, that was the big success. If one were to tax the 10 wealthiest people, the 10 billionaires, on the profits made during the pandemic at 99%, which is a very high amount, of course, we would be able to pay for vaccines for the whole world, have health systems for everyone. We would be able to also compensate for the damage of climate change and have policies that address gender-based violence. That, of course, is an example, but they will still be better off than at the beginning of the pandemic. There are several countries considering wealth tax, and in fact, during World War II, it was done. There was tax at 100% to address the extreme effects of the war. So we're in a similar situation of crisis now. So we're looking at considering that type of measure. The US is also considering wealth taxation. Argentina did a one-off solidarity tax that allowed them to raise 2.6 billion to address COVID recovery in Argentina. So looking at those policies in different countries would be something to consider now, so that countries can invest in health systems that are adequate, in ending gender-based violence, which has been the other pandemic that has happened in the shadows, to really address the climate breakdown that is already killing. And in our report, we show that inequality kills. And if we were able to address all these issues, we would be probably saving the lives of at least 21,000 people every year. I see, within there. I just try and keep them within the frame. Okay. So this level of extreme inequality is not inevitable. So there are policies that one can do. And the way the system is set up at the moment, when governments did the rescue packages and pumped trillions into the economy, into financial markets, in order to support the economy for all, what happened is a lot of it went into the pockets of the billionaires because of the way things are set up. And in fact, as a whole, on average worldwide, the 99% of humanity is worse off. And a large amount, 160 million people, have fallen into poverty. So many of the goals that we had in terms of poverty reduction or gender parity have been set back as a result of the pandemic, which is why it requires strong intervention, and it's really a question of choice, because this extreme inequality is not inevitable and it is possible to address. Just there. Okay. Yeah, we talk about the refugee stuff. Yes, and that. Vaccine development has been a great story of the pandemic. It was developed in record time and produced rapidly, but sadly it has been really focused and hoarded by the rich countries. And this is a result of the way rich countries have protected the monopolies of pharmaceuticals. And a solution would be to lift those intellectual property rights on vaccines so that they can be produced with quality across the world. So developing countries traditionally produce most vaccines, but they have been barred from producing COVID vaccines, and that has meant that they have had a much longer hit economically, which means that we see now that after a long time, finally, unfortunately, inequality is rising between countries. So those least developed countries are being held behind by the lack of access to vaccines, and this is really killing people. You're twice as likely to die from COVID in a developing country than you are in a rich country. The point is, extreme inequality is not inevitable, and this is why it brings us hope that in the US there's a discussion on wealth taxation. This is taxing the wealth of billionaires who are at the top, who have amounts that can really solve global problems. And also in China there's discussion about reducing the power of monopolies. So these are policies that help redistribute wealth so that there is greater prosperity and that we have a fairer system. And there are countries that have done things like that. Costa Rica years ago dreamt of universal health care for all, and they achieved it. So they spend around 1/12 of what America spends on health per capita, and have a slightly longer life expectancy.